Meritocracy is one of those fascinating concepts that on paper sounds like the golden ticket to a fair and just society, a world where your intelligence, effort, and dedication dictate your success.
Who will not hang up the phone until their client either buys or fucking dies!
No nepotism, no inherited privilege, just sheer talent and perseverance determining who gets to sit on the throne of success. Sounds perfect, right? Except that reality loves to laugh in our faces. But let's proceed by steps. After all, if we're going to unravel the great illusion, we might as well do it properly. The term meritocracy was coined by British sociologist Michael Young in 1958 in his satirical book, The Rise of the Meritocracy. Oh yes, it was meant to be a critique, not a compliment. Young envisioned a dystopian society where intelligence and effort rigidly dictated social status, creating an arrogant elite and a deeply resentful underclass. But, in a hilarious twist of irony, the term was hijacked and rebranded as a positive ideal. Politicians and business leaders latched onto it like a lifeline, conveniently ignoring Young's warning about the dangerous arrogance that meritocratic systems create. Because who doesn't love a system that allows those at the top to believe they deserve everything they have, while blaming the rest for not trying hard enough? The idea of selecting the best to lead has ancient roots, though. Confucius, back in the 6th century BC, insisted that rulers should be chosen based on virtue and ability, rather than birthright. The Chinese Empire introduced the imperial examination system to supposedly ensure that only the most capable governed. Plato had his vision of philosopher kings, because naturally, those who read and reflect all day should automatically be in charge. Reality has always found a way to twist these noble ideas into elaborate mechanisms for maintaining power. Even Aristotle admitted that social inequalities would always shape an individual's opportunities, making the idea of equal starting points a convenient myth, perfect for bedtime stories, but laughable in real life. The illusion of meritocracy was always a powerful tool in the hands of the ruling classes, a carrot on a stick, leading generations to believe in a game whose rules were never fair to begin with. Fast forward to the 20th century, and the world seemed to embrace the meritocratic dream. Governments and institutions framed meritocracy as the foundation for progress, arguing that anyone, regardless of background, could achieve success through hard work. Yet these policies often led to unintended consequences. By focusing exclusively on individual effort while neglecting systemic barriers, they widened economic disparities rather than closing them. The gap between the privileged and the disadvantaged grew as access to elite education, high-paying jobs, and influential networks remained concentrated in the hands of the few. Resentment brewed among those who realized that no amount of effort could compensate for an inherently rigged system, paving the way for economic inequality and ultimately deep societal divisions. Post-World War II leaders like Lyndon Johnson in the US pushed for education as the great equalizer, the key to climbing the social ladder. But then came the 1980s and 1990s, when figures like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher turbocharged the self-made man myth. Suddenly, success was entirely an individual responsibility, and failure was simply the result of laziness or incompetence. Government support system, excessive. Social safety nets, unnecessary. If you couldn't pull yourself up by your bootstraps, well, maybe you just didn't deserve success in the first place. The American dream, once a beacon of hope, had transformed into a burden of proof. Proof that if you failed, you had no one to blame but yourself. Yet, the numbers tell a different story. In the UK, only 7% of students attend private schools, yet these schools produce 33% of members of parliament and 71% of senior judges. In the US, a whopping 60% of Ivy League students come from the top 20% richest families, merit or a very expensive entry ticket. The same pattern plays out globally. Education, rather than being the great equalizer, is often just a way for the privileged to reinforce their dominance. After all, what better way to pretend a system is fair than by calling it merit-based, while ensuring only a select few ever get to compete? Those who can afford the best education, tutoring, and social connections are playing an entirely different game, one where the outcome is practically preordained. It's like watching a marathon where half the runners are given a 10-mile head start and then being told that it's a fair race. However, not every country follows this pattern. Take Denmark, for instance. With its strong welfare state, tuition-free universities, and comprehensive social support systems, Denmark consistently ranks among the highest in social mobility. Children born into lower-income families in Denmark have a significantly higher chance of reaching a higher socioeconomic status compared to those in the US or UK. The country's emphasis on equal access to education and robust labor protections ensures that opportunity is not dictated solely by birthright. This stark contrast demonstrates that policy choices, rather than inherent talent disparities, shape the reality of social mobility. But now, let's compare two hypothetical children, one born into wealth, the other into poverty. The rich child gets private tutors, top-tier schools, access to cultural enrichment, and a network of influential connections. The poor child, underfunded schools, a chaotic home environment, and an uphill battle just to get basic educational support. By the age of 3, the vocabulary of a wealthy child is double that of a poor child. By the time they apply to university, the latter is already miles behind. According to the Global Social Mobility Index, a child born into a low-income family has 50% less chance of attending university compared to their wealthy counterpart. The OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, also reports that in countries with significant economic inequality, social mobility is under 20%. These numbers aren't just statistics. They are the harsh reality of a world that rewards inherited privilege over effort and talent. And then we have the modern workplace, where meritocracy is supposedly in full effect. Yet, beyond the staggering disparity in executive salaries, corporations have found countless ways to reinforce economic inequality under the guise of merit-based success. From unpaid internships that favor the financially privileged to promotion systems that reward networking over competence, the system is designed to maintain the status quo. Companies increasingly rely on outsourcing and contract work to reduce labor costs, denying workers stability while funneling profits upward. Meanwhile, employees are subjected to performance-based salary structures that, in reality, mask subjective biases and favoritism. Even in industries that claim to value talent, such as tech and finance, access to mentorship and leadership opportunities often hinges on pre-existing connections rather than ability. In this way, corporate structures don't just reflect social inequality, they actively perpetuate it. Except, of course, for the small detail that CEOs today earn over 350 times what the average worker does, compared to just 30 times in the 1970s. But don't worry. Surely the CEO's work is 350 times more valuable than yours. Meanwhile, those at the top pay their own price. High stress, 80-hour work weeks, crumbling marriages, and an obsession with productivity that borders on masochism. Studies from Harvard Business Review show that executives report significantly higher levels of anxiety, depression, and insomnia. Divorce rates among high-powered professionals are also disproportionately high, with studies indicating that those working 60-hour weeks or more face a 40% greater likelihood of separation. Sure, they have yachts, but they also have therapists on speed dial. But isn't it ironic that, despite all this wealth and power, they too are victims of the system, trapped in an endless pursuit of proving their worth? The 2008 financial crisis should have been the final nail in meritocracy's coffin. As millions lost their homes and jobs, faith in the fairness of the system crumbled. The crisis revealed how those at the top, armed with elite degrees and extensive networks, could make catastrophic decisions without facing real consequences. Meanwhile, the working class bore the brunt of the collapse, fueling widespread resentment. This economic devastation became fertile ground for populist movements, as people sought alternatives to the establishment figures who had long championed meritocracy. The disillusionment with traditional elites played a significant role in the rise of figures like Donald Trump, who capitalized on anti-elite sentiment and positioned himself as a champion of those left behind by globalization and financial deregulation. His 2016 victory was fueled by a rejection of the political establishment, an appeal to economic nationalism, and the promise to restore power to the so-called forgotten people. But what many dismissed as a one-time political upheaval proved to be a deeper transformation of the electorate. Trump's re-election in 2025 underscored the endurance of this movement. His ability to maintain a loyal base despite media scrutiny, legal challenges, and internal controversies demonstrated how deeply entrenched frustration with elites had become. Many of his supporters viewed him not just as a politician, but as a symbol of defiance against a system they believed had failed them. Economic stagnation, corporate outsourcing, and wage suppression had widened the gap between the working class and the wealthy elite, reinforcing the belief that traditional politicians, on both the left and right, were incapable of addressing their struggles. Instead of recognizing that intelligence and talent don't automatically equate to ethical or competent decision-making, the narrative continued to focus on individual failures rather than systemic dysfunction. Data from the Financial Stability Board indicates that systemic banking failures had little to do with rogue individuals and everything to do with structurally incentivized risk-taking. The same structures that led to the 2008 crisis persisted, further exacerbating inequality and fueling the anti-establishment wave. Trump's political success was not merely the result of his rhetoric, but a reflection of a broader societal shift, one in which the idea of meritocracy had been thoroughly discredited in the eyes of many. When institutions fail, when wealth remains concentrated in the hands of a few, and when ordinary people feel abandoned, populism finds fertile ground. Whether his leadership truly benefited the people who elected him is another question entirely. But one thing is clear: the narrative of meritocracy, once held up as the foundation of success, had been shattered for millions of people who no longer believed in it. The dream of a fair, merit-based society is beautiful. But if that dream is to become reality, meaningful reforms are needed. Strengthening public education, ensuring access to affordable higher learning, and implementing policies that reduce inherited privilege could help level the playing field. Additionally, restructuring labor markets to promote fair wages, work-life balance, and transparent hiring practices could counteract the systemic biases deeply embedded in today's economic framework. But reform cannot stop there. The way society values different professions must change. The idea that only certain jobs, those requiring advanced degrees or corporate leadership, deserve recognition and financial security reinforces the illusion of meritocracy. True reform must involve a cultural shift that acknowledges the dignity and necessity of all work, from skilled trades to service jobs to creative industries. Without respect and fair compensation for every profession, the system will continue to favor a select few while disregarding those who form the foundation of the economy. Beyond economic measures, political reform is necessary to break cycles of inherited power. Implementing stronger anti-corruption laws, limiting corporate influence in policymaking, and increasing social protections can help create an environment where success is not dictated solely by birthright. Countries with strong social mobility, such as Denmark and Finland, demonstrate that strategic investment in social programs and labor rights creates a more level playing field. Without such measures, meritocracy remains a comforting illusion rather than a functioning principle of justice. Without structural change, it remains a fairy tale, a convenient justification for why the rich keep getting richer while the rest scramble for scraps. Until that changes, meritocracy will continue to be less of a noble ideal and more of an elaborate joke, one where the punchline is always on the people who were never invited to the game in the first place. And if you ever doubt that, just look at the numbers, the patterns, and the history. The story repeats itself generation after generation, because the system is working exactly as it was designed to. If you made it this far, congratulations. You officially have more patience than most. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Or don't. It's entirely up to you. But if you do, make sure to turn on notifications because, let's face it, I steer clear of the social media circus, and this is the only way you'll know when something worth your time shows up. And hey, if you think someone in your life could use a little perspective, share this video. Friends, family, or that group chat where everyone thinks they're a philosopher. Who knows? It might make them slightly less clueless, though I wouldn't count on it. For those who crave more than just videos, check out the Cynic Journal blog. It's where the cynicism goes deeper. Perfect for when you're tired of shallow conversations and need something smarter than your newsfeed. Share an article or two if you think your friends can handle it. And if you're feeling generous, you can support this cynical endeavor on Buy Me a Coffee, Patreon, or Ko-fi. It won't fix humanity, but it might help me keep the caffeine levels dangerously high. Thanks for watching. Stay skeptical. And remember, reality is best served with disdain.